Solomon knelt on the cold stone floor of the Gibeon temple. Dust motes drifted in the shafts of light that pierced the high ceiling, illuminating the stillness of the chamber. He bowed his head, pressing his palms flat against the rough surface. He did not reach for a crown. He did not touch the hilt of a sword. He left his status at the threshold and moved into the center of the silence. The air felt heavy, charged with the weight of the kingdom he had inherited. He took a breath, held it, and let it out slowly. He whispered into the void, his voice barely audible against the vastness of the stone walls. He asked for nothing that could be weighed or measured. He did not ask for long life. He did not ask for the destruction of his enemies. He asked only for a discerning heart to lead his people. He repeated the words, his focus narrowing until the world outside the temple ceased to exist. His hands remained steady against the floor as he waited. The silence deepened, pressing against his ears, expectant and absolute. He did not move, his posture fixed in absolute surrender to the request he had just voiced. The response did not arrive as a sound. It arrived as a change in the air. The temperature in the chamber rose, shifting from the damp chill of stone to a sudden, pervasive warmth. Above him, the shafts of sunlight began to thicken, losing their clarity as they coalesced into a dense, shimmering substance. Dust motes that had hung suspended in the air suddenly ignited, swirling in a frantic, golden dance that defied the stillness of the room. Solomon kept his eyes fixed on the floor, but the light bled through his eyelids, turning his vision into a sea of amber. The glow intensified, pulsing in rhythm with his own heartbeat. It descended from the high ceiling, wrapping around his shoulders like a physical weight. He felt the tension in his neck and back dissolve as the light pressed against his skin, warm and grounding. The shadows in the corners of the temple retreated. The air hummed with a low, resonant vibration. The request had been heard, and the answer was settling into the marrow of his bones. Time ceased to be a measure of days and became a measure of stone. Jerusalem rose from the hills, a sprawling testament to a new era. Masons shaped ivory into towering walls that caught the morning light, while smiths hammered gold into the gates that guarded the city. The landscape shifted. Where once there were only rocky slopes, hanging gardens now bloomed, filled with the sharp cries of peacocks displaying iridescent tails. Artisans labored in the heat, their chisels ringing against marble until the city glowed with a pale, polished sheen. Solomon oversaw the transformation, his presence constant as the structures climbed toward the sky. He moved from the temple floor to the center of the palace, where the great ivory throne stood as the heart of the kingdom. 6 steps led up to the seat, flanked by lions carved from solid gold, their eyes fixed on the horizon. He ascended the steps, the weight of the city resting on his shoulders. He sat, his hands resting on the armrests, looking out over the kingdom he had built. The transition was complete. The seeker who had knelt in the dust was gone, replaced by a ruler whose word held the force of law. The court was a rhythmic machine of statecraft. Scribes scratched quills against parchment, and petitioners waited in disciplined lines. Solomon sat motionless, his chin resting on his palm, observing the flow of daily governance. Then, the heavy cedar doors groaned. They did not open. They were forced. 2 women stumbled into the hall, their movements jagged and desperate. They dragged a small bundled shape between them, clutching it with white-knuckled intensity. The court's ambient hum vanished. The women's faces were masks of raw, unvarnished agony, their eyes darting and wild. They began to shout, their voices clashing in the air. One woman pointed a trembling finger at the other, her voice cracking. The second woman lunged, her hands clawing at the bundle. Their cries echoed, bouncing off the polished marble, shattering the stillness. Solomon leaned forward, his gaze locking onto the scene. He watched the way their hands shook, and the way they fought for the child as if the world were ending. The peace of the palace was gone. Solomon did not raise his voice to meet their clamor. He simply leaned forward, his eyes tracking the frantic movements of their hands and the desperate rhythm of their breathing. He waited for the exact moment their rage peaked. With a single, slow motion, he lifted his hand and pointed toward the guard standing at the base of the throne. The guard stepped forward, his boots clicking sharply against the stone floor. He reached for the hilt at his side, The metal rasped against the scabbard, a sound that cut through the shouting like a razor. The guard drew the blade in one fluid motion, the steel catching a shaft of sunlight and throwing a jagged beam of white light across the room. The weapon was long, curved, and lethal. The air in the hall seemed to vanish, replaced by a sudden, crushing pressure. The shouting stopped instantly. The women froze, their eyes locked on the edge of the steel. The court fell into a suffocating, absolute silence, where the only sound was the distant, rhythmic drip of water. The guard took a step toward the bundle. The steel blade caught the light again, casting a flickering reflection onto the floor. The first woman did not wait. She shrieked, a raw, piercing sound that tore through the stillness of the hall. She lunged forward, throwing her body over the child, her arms splayed wide to form a desperate, human barrier against the steel. Her fingers dug into the stone, her knuckles white with the force of her grip. She pressed her forehead against the ground, shielding the small form beneath her. Meanwhile, the second woman stood back. She did not move to intervene. Her face settled into a mask of rigid, unyielding lines. As the guard paused, she gave a slow, deliberate nod. Her eyes remained dry, her posture stiff and unmoving. One woman was a storm of protective instinct. The other was a statue of cold calculation. The air in the court grew heavy. The guard held his position, the edge of the metal inches from the first woman's back. She did not flinch. She only tightened her hold. Solomon raised a single hand. The movement was slight, but the guard responded instantly. He pulled the blade back, the steel sliding into the scabbard with a sharp, final click that echoed against the high ceiling. The first woman remained pressed to the floor, her shoulders heaving, still shielding the child from a threat that was no longer there. Solomon leaned forward, his gaze shifting from the woman on the ground to the one standing in cold silence. He pointed a steady finger toward the mother who had chosen to surrender the child rather than see it harmed. His voice filled the hall, resonant and clear. "Give the living child to her," he commanded. "She is the mother." The words landed with the weight of stone. The second woman recoiled, her composure shattering as the truth took hold. The first woman let out a sob, her grip on the child loosening. A murmur rippled through the court, starting as a low hum and swelling into a collective sound of astonishment. The heavy cedar doors groaned shut, sealing the court away. The echoes of the day faded, leaving the palace to the creeping shadows of night. Solomon walked the long, empty corridors, his footsteps rhythmic against the polished stone. He reached his private chamber, where the air held the scent of dry parchment and cooling wax. He did not call for servants. He moved to a heavy wooden desk, pulled a chair close, and sat. A single candle burned in the center of the workspace, its flame dancing in the draft, casting long, flickering shapes against the walls. He reached for a quill and dipped the tip into a pot of dark ink. The silence here was absolute, a stark contrast to the shouting and the murmurs that had filled the hall only hours before. He leaned over the parchment, his hand steady as he began to write. Each stroke of the quill sounded sharp in the stillness, a deliberate, scratching rhythm that marked the passage of time. He was no longer the judge of men, but a student of life, distilling the chaos of the day into lines of enduring truth. The candle flame sputtered and died, its final wisp of smoke curling into the rafters. Solomon pushed the parchment aside, the ink dry and dark against the grain of the wood. He stood, his joints stiff from hours of motionless focus, and walked toward the balcony. The air outside was cool, carrying the faint, crisp scent of dew on stone. Below, the city of Jerusalem lay in deep indigo shadow. He gripped the cold stone railing and looked toward the eastern horizon. A thin, pale sliver of light began to bleed into the darkness, turning the sky from charcoal to a soft, bruised violet. This was the moment of transition. As the light expanded, the towers of the city caught the first rays, shifting from gray to amber, then to a brilliant, polished gold. The hanging gardens emerged from the gloom, the leaves glistening with moisture. Solomon watched the sun crest the hills, a steady, relentless force that pushed the night back into the valleys. He looked down at the city, not as a conqueror, but as a steward measuring growth. The peace of the morning was absolute, There were no shouts, no clashing steel. The sun climbed higher, flooding the streets with warmth, and he remained there, a silent observer of the peace.